Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm the author of the young adult fantasy Firian Rising and Into the Unreal, the sequel which just came out this week. And welcome to English Nerd. So today in the All About A Tale of Two Cities series that we're in the middle of, I'm going to be talking about Book 2, Chapters 15 and 16. Now, in general, I've been going along with the divisions that Dickens himself made when he put out the story serially, but there was a break after knitting and there was a break after still knitting, and in my opinion, it just kind of makes sense to talk about those two chapters together regardless. So, Chapter 15, Knitting, is where we're picking up the story. So at the beginning of this chapter, Monsieur Defarge is coming back to his wine shop with the Mender of Roads. The Mender of Roads we've seen before. He was in the Monseigneur in the Country chapter when the Marquis stopped the carriage and said, "Who is that who's staring underneath the carriage? Have him explain himself." And then he said there was somebody hanging on underneath. A year has passed since that occurred, so it's about 1781, if you've been, following along. So Defarge and the Mender of Roads go to the wine shop, and Madame Defarge and Defarge both kind of act strangely and formally when they first walk in, and it turns out that there's a kind of signal code going on, and some of the people who are in the wine shop leave individually to meet up at another location. So kind of fast forwarding to that location, Defarge takes the Mender of Roads to that upper garret room where Dr. Manette was making shoes back at the beginning of the story. He's obviously not there now. He's doing much, much better. But that's where they meet. And this is where we really get some planning for the revolution. We've seen it brewing beneath the surface. We've seen Gaspard, for instance, writing blood on the wall and then later stabbing the Marquis. And we've seen the anger that Monsieur Defarge has and the fact that they have code names. So we know that something's going on, but this is really the chapter where we get some of the mechanics. So 5 people by the name of Jacques meet together to hear the story that the Mender of Roads has to tell about following up on Gaspard's murder of the Marquis. So of the 5 Jacques, none of them are actually named Jacques, as far as I know. Jacques 4 is Defarge. Jacques 5 is the newly inducted one. That's the Mender of Roads, whose name we never really know. And Jacques 3 is just a complete creep, so keep an eye on him. Just for creepiness, he always croaks, and he's like, yes! He's like the Gollum of the group. We never get his name either, but Jacques 3 is a complete creeper. Jacques 1 and 2 are normal guys. So those are the ones that are helpful to know. So the Mender of Roads is there to tell the story about Gaspard and the backlash for the murder. So he was tracked down, long story short. And when the nobles were taking Gaspard to prison, they said, "Come on," says the chief of that company, pointing to the village, "bring him fast to his tomb." The reason that I point this out is that this is the first instance we see of a sort of eye for an eye justice that both sides, the upper and the lower class, are enacting against each other. On the hilt of the knife that was in the Marquis, there was a note that said, "Drive him fast to his tomb," and now they're using that same language against Gaspard. So they execute Gaspard, and the way that they do it ends up being important because, again, there's this eye for an eye that is going to happen related to this. So yeah, he's executed, even though Defarge pled for his life before the king, which is kind of surprising. He really cares about Gaspard, but Defarge was just beaten up and sent away. So the way that Gaspard was killed, it says, "In the morning by the fountain there is raised a gallows 40 feet high, poisoning the water. On the top of the gallows is fixed the knife, blade upward with its point in the air, and he is hanged there 40 feet high and is left hanging, poisoning the water." I skipped over some of the storytelling of the Mender of Roads, but he's a fun guy. He likes to, well, fun's the wrong word. He likes to act out what he's saying, so if he says, oh, he was tied up like this, then he always acts everything out. But the important part is the way that Gaspard gets killed here. He's hanged over the fountain where his child was run over, poisoning the water. So not only is he punished, but he is also poisoning the water source for the entire village. So really everybody's being punished for this. And no gallows needs to be 40 feet high. That's like an absurd height. The point is that everybody sees it, and it's a message to every person not to commit the same kinds of crimes. So just remember some of those details if you're studying this, because those will come back later on. Before this meeting comes to a close, there is a really important revelation that happens. All the Jacques agree that the chateau and all the race ought to be doomed to extinction, or how do they put it? Registered as doomed to destruction, the chateau and all the race. So that's everybody who's related to the Marquis, everybody who's involved in their opinion, murder of Gaspard. And we learn how they're keeping that register, how they're keeping that list of names. And it's Madame Defarge's knitting. She's been knitting this entire time, and she knits on with the steadfastness of fate we saw at the end of the Monseigneur in Town chapter. But we didn't know what she was knitting. We assumed that it was nothing important, but no, it is the register of names and descriptions, and it's a hit list essentially for when the revolution breaks out. It's in her personal symbols, so nobody can read it. It's not like it's a scarf that says Evremond on it or something, but she can read it, and it's so one of the Jacques asks, is there any embarrassment that can arise by the manner of our keeping the register? And Defarge says, trust me, it's safe. Even if Madame, my wife, did not write down a syllable of this, she would not forget a single detail. She is fixed on revenge. So the insight that we get into Madame Defarge there is really fascinating. She is one of the masterminds of this revolution. She's not just a passenger, she's a driver. So yeah, that knitting. It brings a whole new light to that scene where she's staring the Marquis in the face and knitting. I mean, she's getting his description, she's getting his name for the crimes that he committed for killing the Gaspard's son. So Madame Defarge takes the Mender of Rhodes to Versailles. And she's knitting while she's at Versailles, just knitting all the names of the nobles who were there. The idea is that the Mender of Rhodes can see the opulence of the upper class and have even more reason to rebel against them, want to take what they have, that sort of thing. But there's an interesting interaction that Madame Defarge has with one of the party guests there. It says this: "You work hard, madame," said a man near her. "Yes," answered Madame Defarge, "I have a good deal to do." "What do you make, madame?" He's just trying to make friendly conversation. "Many things." "For instance?" "For instance," returned Madame Defarge composedly, "shrouds." And the man just backs away. That's pretty excellent. And this supports the idea that Madame Defarge is like a fate because she controls the lives of people in what she's making. Okay, chapter 16, still knitting. I'll pick up my pace here. But the Defarges find out that there is a spy commissioned for the Saint Antoine quarter of Paris to root out any potential revolution, and it turns out it's an Englishman. So Monsieur Defarge has figured out all this intelligence, and he brings it back to his wife so she can add his name, the name of the spy, to her knitted register. And they have this nerdy moment when he's describing what the spy looks like and the name. He says, "Oh yeah, he's about this tall, and his nose is inclined to the left, so his expression is sinister." Now, for all of you who did not study Latin in school, that's a Latin joke because it comes from this Latin word that means left hand, sinister, left hand. It's this whole thing. But anyway, they both get it, and they're like, ha ha ha. So the spy is John Barsad. John Barsad, one of the dodgy witnesses from the trial that we saw in the disappointment chapter. The one who was kicked downstairs after cheating at cards, that guy. So, hey, John Barsad is back. I told you to remember him. Before they talk with John Barsad, because he does come in later in the chapter, as you know, there's a conversation that highlights the relationship and the differences between Monsieur and Madame Defarge. And so Defarge has been planning this revolution for ages, as has Madame Defarge, and he's getting kind of depressed. And Madame Defarge notices, and they agree, it's a long time. It's a long time. But look at the way that they describe this coming revolution. It tells us a lot about who they are. So Madame Defarge says, yeah, of course it's a long time. Vengeance and retribution require a long time. It is the rule. It does not take a long time to strike a man with lightning, said Defarge. How long, demanded Madame composedly, does it take to make and store the lightning? Tell me. So Defarge thinks of this revolution as like a lightning storm. It's going to zap all those people who have done them wrong. It's going to get people like the Marquis, strike them down and then lift, and there will be a nice clear day. But Madame says, it does not take a long time, said Madame, for an earthquake to swallow a town. Well, tell me how long it takes to prepare the earthquake. A long time, I suppose, said Defarge. But when it is ready, Madame Defarge says, it takes place and grinds to pieces everything before it. In the meantime, it is always preparing, though it is not seen or heard. That is your consolation. Keep it. So Monsieur Defarge thinks of the revolution as a lightning storm, just sapping those people who are responsible, and Madame Defarge thinks of it as an earthquake, which has far more widespread destruction. An earthquake swallowing a town, as opposed to a lightning storm that gets just a handful of important people. The visions are completely different. Really, they both want retribution, they both want justice, they both want revenge for the wrongs that have been done upon them, but their ideas of what's going to happen are worth noting. Madame Defarge seems a lot more violent than Defarge here. Her true nature comes out. Even Monsieur Defarge feels called out by his wife and is a little bit nervous almost when she says, you've got to stop at nothing. You've got to stop at nothing to get this retribution. So the differences between them are just solidified, underlined in their interactions with Barsad. At first, when John Barsad comes into the wine shop the next morning, or the next day? Madame Defarge is the one at the counter, and Barsad sees this lady knitting and thinks, oh, how nice, and strikes up a conversation, not aware at all that she's getting a better description of him, knitting his name literally at that moment, John Barsad. It's a pretty pattern, he says. Madame just smiles. You think so? How nice. He orders something, cognac, and says, oh, this is marvelous cognac. And she says, yeah, the cognac's really flattered. She's just so dry. She's horrible and violent, but she has some style. I think she's kind of funny. So throughout this interaction, basically, John Barsad, as you can see in this illustration by Fizz, is trying to get Monsieur and Madame Defarge to commiserate with him about how horrible the execution of Gaspard was. If he can get them to side with him like that, or if he can get them to admit that they're part of that group of jocks, then he'll have some dirt on them. But they give him nothing at all. When Monsieur Defarge walks in a second later, Barsad says, oh, hi, good day, Jacques. And the guy says, I don't know who you're talking about. My name is Ernest Defarge. And they give him nothing. Oh, isn't it sad about Gaspard? I don't know about it. Can you, what happened to him? And so they just play it all coy. The only thing that's new that Barsad tells them about is Lucy's wedding. So you guys all read the chapters where all the people were vying for Lucy's attention. Apparently, and unsurprisingly, Darnay won that bachelorette contest, and she and Darnay are going to get married. And so this is news to the Defarges. Barsad says, "Oh yeah, Miss Manette is going to be married. I understand that you know her family, her father. You know, he stayed in your garret room for a while, and she's going to marry the present Marquis." It's easy to forget that Darnay is the present Marquis, but the old Marquis died, and so even though Darnay has not taken any of the fortune or anything, everything belongs to him. He is the present Marquis. Barsad says, "But he lives unknown in England. He's no Marquis there. He is Mr. Charles Darnay. D'Aulnay, spelled like this, is the name of his mother's family." Madame Defarge knitted steadily, but the intelligence had a palpable effect on her husband. So this news is terrible for the Manettes, because now Lucy is going to be the wife of the Marquis. She's going to be essentially added to the register, because just in the previous chapter, the Jacques all agreed that the entire family of the Marquis ought to be registered as doomed to destruction. So that includes Lucy, but for Defarge, more importantly, that includes Dr. Manette, her father. Now Dr. Manette is also related to the Marquis. So Defarge, who cared about Dr. Manette all those years, being his servant when he was actually a doctor in France, he's super bothered by this. He does not want Dr. Manette to be added to the register to be killed. He wants the lightning only to strike the guilty people. But Madame Defarge wants the earthquake to open up and completely swallow the entire group of people who have ever associated with them. So she's calmly adding the names of Lucy and Dr. Manette probably to the register, and says, "Oh, well, hopefully they don't come to France, because that's, if they do, their fate is out of my hands." So Madame Defarge does not care at all that she's adding those names to the register, but Defarge has a line. Madame Defarge has no line that she won't cross in order to get what she thinks is justice. So that's pretty much it for those two chapters, knitting and still knitting, huge revelations, the famous image of Madame Defarge knitting away, planning for the destruction of all these people. So pretty fascinating stuff. I hope you're enjoying the book, or you have enjoyed the book in the past, and this is just gravy on top. All right, I'll see you very soon. Bye.